Welcome to the Modeling Lifestyle, where we celebrate how modelers have embraced their modeling and friendships as a lifestyle. We discuss how modeling can become a life passion and lead to lifelong friendships. The goal of the Modeling Lifestyle is to preserve the modeling and interests of leading modelers and the modeling industry. The Modeling Lifestyle is sponsored by NGMC, who believes that through bringing hobbyists together with both information and modeling, the hobby will grow stronger with more model builders than ever. NGMC, which started as narrow gauge modeling company, is focused in 1/4 inch scale across hobbies. NGMC is a market leader in 1/4 inch scale with a range of products from over 50 vendors. In 2021, NGMC became the largest reseller of out-of-production model paint in North America with over 9,000 bottles in stock. And now to Jim Kello, MMR, host of the Modeling Lifestyle.
I love the sound of a whistle.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We've got a great guest for you, and I hope that you really enjoy the show. Our show is not just to introduce you to great modelers, but these are people who have made significant contributions to our hobby and made modeling a significant part of their lifestyles. I want to thank you so much to the viewers who are on our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling, for joining us tonight. Feel free to use the chat function. We have someone monitoring it. And if you have questions for our guest or the people on our show, just put it in the chat function. And as soon as I find out about it, I'll be glad to ask your question, and we'll get somebody to answer it for you. All of our shows naturally are run by volunteers. No one's paid for this. We just do it because we really enjoy it and we think the hobby deserves it. We need a lot of help. So if you have a little time that you can spare us, please let me know. My email is jimkello@newtracksmodeling.com. And I'd love to hear from you and talk about how you might be able to give a little time to help us be able to put these shows together and have them last a long time in the future. We also have a Patreon account. And if you're so inclined, we'd appreciate any kind of contribution you might want to make to help us defray the cost of operating these shows. As I say, no one is paid for anything, but we do have some out-of-pocket costs that we have to cover. We've started a brand new program recently. It's a scholarship program for young model railroaders to continue their education in a STEAM program at a 2 or 4 year college or an accredited technical school. And we got this funded through your contributions, and we can't thank you enough for that. Right now, we're in the process of trying to make sure that we can disseminate the information about our program as widely as possible to get as many model railroaders interested in applying for the scholarship as we can. We have banners that are 7 foot by 3 foot that we're going to be having at various shows around the country that have a QR code on them. So if you see one of our banners or if you see one of our handouts, just go up with your cell phone and you can use the QR code to get the detailed information about the scholarship, how to apply, the application itself, and you can apply online. So we hope that you'll consider it. We hope that in the future years we'll be able to do more than one $1,000 scholarship. But first we have to get our 501c3 approved by the federal government. And that'll probably take us another few months to accomplish. But once we get that done, in the following years, we hope to be able to offer more and even greater numbers for scholarships. So with that advertisement said, I want to introduce you to a great guest we have tonight, Keith Wiseman. Keith is really a fantastic modeler. He used to be able to do it more before he got so involved with his business that now most of his modeling, I understand, it turns on the kits that he has to put together for you to enjoy. And he doesn't have the time as he used to really do a lot of modeling for himself. But Keith is really a a major influence in our hobby. The companies that he has, that he's acquired, the kits that he's brought to the market that without him may never have been in the market for you to enjoy. All of these kinds of things that he does, a lot of people may not know about. That's what this show is hoping to do, is to highlight the contributions that these leaders of our hobby have made and are making, and allow you to meet them and talk to them and find out about them. So Keith, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to join us.
Oh, sounds like fun. Let's go.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
Born and raised in a small Kentucky town. You know, my father was kind of a gadget hound, and he went from airplanes to boats to trains to back to boats, and ended up landing on antique farm machinery. So I was always exposed to the older way of doing things growing up. So, and other than that, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Other than that, been here almost all my life, except for 10 years, lived in an adjacent county, and married, 3 boys, 1 grandchild, and, you know, trying to live the typical American dream, working for myself.
I understand. What drew you to become a model railroader in all this?
When I was very young, 3rd, 4th grade, that time period, had a lot of health issues. There was a cabinet in the basement. My dad had already had his model railroading phase. And when I was home and couldn't do anything, I seemed to bury my head in those old model railroaders and railroad model craftsmen from about 53 to 60. And a lot of that stuff just stuck. Modeling was always there. The trains didn't really happen till later. You know, once Dad let me play with the trains that were in the cabinets with the magazines, but never had a Lionel or anything like that. The old, you know, classic story. Mine actually started with HO stuff, and I actually built some of his Varney kits and things like that. And of course, destroyed more than my fair share of plastic models over the years. And then the modeling came kind of serious at about age 12. And especially after a trip to Cass Scenic Railroad, and that my dad thought would be a good stop for us on the way home from the Outer Banks. And that was so enlightening to me that all I got the following Christmas was a PFM B3 Shea, which was a huge gift, and 1 package of underwear. And I still think that was my best Christmas. But it just kind of built from there. You know, periods on, periods off throughout my life. But at about 32 or 33 years old, I came back to it, and it just kind of exploded. And,
well, it sounds like you're kind of an HO guy. Is that the only scale you've ever modeled?
Well, no, I did HO originally, and then through the influences of my dear friend Tug Wilson, who had a little hobby shop in his drugstore here in Paris, Kentucky. Most of you know Tug. And he started showing me the narrow gauge stuff and told me about brass, and really encouraged me for some reason to hone my modeling skills. And in lots of cases, he handed me something, said, "Here, take this home and paint it for me." And, you know, and I was taking apart, you know, a $300 brass locomotive that didn't belong to me. And, you know, you get them back together when you do that, you know, and it's somebody else's. But and it kind of built from there. And then I started with some fine scale miniatures kits like everybody else, and stayed in HO for quite some time, HO and HO3. Got married, had babies, brass trains became diapers, you know, and then was out of it for a long period of time. And after married again, after about 3 years, it just kind of tripped over the box at my mom and dad's house, and pulled out all this stuff and took it down to my house and started digging through it, and just kind of went from there. So, and then I couldn't afford to do anything. So, or buy anything. Tug still had his hobby shop, and started doing work for other people to be able to afford the things that I wanted. and it just kind of grew from there in the custom painting and building business for the first few years of our business's life. So,
well, that sounds like a fantastic way to get involved with model railroading. No question about it.
oh yeah, yeah, just grew up in the hobby, so to speak. So yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so many different aspects to model railroading. Is there one that you particularly enjoy more than the others?
For building myself, I think it's probably building in brass, especially with the soldering and the things of that nature. You don't have to wait for glue to dry, and you burn your fingers, but you don't have to wait for glue to dry. And that part of it, once I really started building in brass, I started doing a lot of repairs, even for other importers, and then it just kind of went from there. I built some of the PSC Shea kits. In fact, the first one I built, I bought it on Wednesday. I started on it Thursday afternoon. It was a 3-day weekend. It was painted and running up and down the track on Monday afternoon. So the rest of them didn't go that fast, but I didn't sleep much during those 3 or 4 days. But it was once you get the flow of them, it's really a lot of fun to build that way.
My gosh, you're the first person I've met in a long time that loves to build in brass. I've been building it for a long time, but most of the time when I start talking about it, people's eyes roll back in their head.
Oh yeah. It's foreign to a lot of people, and I've gotten to the point now where I even solder most of my white metal builds.
Yeah.
Now you can vaporize some parts real quick if you're not careful where you got the soldering iron set. But
yes, you are.
Yeah. In white metal, they become solder again, pretty much. So.
Well, listen, a lot of people have heard you talk about your modeling and so forth, and heard other people comment on it. Let's take a look at a few of your pictures to get an idea of some of your modeling. What is this?
That is vertical boiler Shea, construction number 60. It was a prototype that went to a Michigan lumber railroad, and that particular model, for some reason, I was drawn to the early tiny Sheas, and the vertical boiler Sheas were something that I thought that the hobby needed in O-scale. Northwest Shortline did basically the same model in HO in the 70s under the JDL name, and JDL was the J part, I can't remember who it was. The D part was Dave Hoffman, and the L part was Lou Julian down in Florida. And Lou was a big influence on my modeling, and later became a very dear friend before we lost Lou. And he supplied the plans from the HO one, and we did a lot of work. I had actually already built some hand-built prototypes of this and was planning to do a domestically produced white metal locomotive kit. But because I had developed a relationship with a builder in Korea, this was my first serious import that I did back in the early 2000s. And we did this one, and we'll see later in other pictures a shorter roof version with a different stack, which was construction number 21, but otherwise they were basically the same locomotive. This particular one is one that went from a factory painted model that I painted up for Lou Julian for his Coon Creek Lumber Company, and this one came from his layout.
Well, that's a beautiful model. I mean, just outstanding. The detail that you've incorporated in that is just unbelievable. Let's see another one. Now, what is this?
That's the O-scale case steam tractor, originally developed by Scale Structures Limited. Later became part of Walthers when they took over Scale Structures. And after that, Walker Model Services, Bob Walker bought it, who's one of the principals in AccuRail. And after that, it was sold to On-Track Models, and they added a whole lot of refinements to it. And for some dumb reason, his name's totally escaping me right now. But and Jerry Strangarity, who's a very well-known modeler in Cincinnati, actually built this one up. But this one is all done with parts that we cast. I like to think that the quality of the castings we're getting out based on the metals we use and the rubber materials that we're using today, that even though that's tremendously old technology, there's been some serious state-of-the-art advancements uh, in the quality of the castings, and I think it really shows when we make new molds off those old, incredibly beautiful patterns. There's an HO version of this kit as well, and I found out on the HO kit, Bill Gould, which is a name many of you may know, does beautiful artwork, did plastic parts. He did most of the pattern work for the HO version when it was Rollins House before Scale Structures got it, and he was 13. So if you ever think you can't do something based on experience, it's basically start with a block of something and end up with the parts you want, you know.
Well, that's a beautiful model. There's just no question about it. What is that white metal that you cast it in? What is the material?
The boiler and firebox are resin, and then the rest of it's all white metal and brass wire parts.
I got you. Well, it's a beautiful model, no question. What do we have here?
This is the first kit I worked with Roger Malinowski on, where he decided to include detail parts in with his buildings. Yeah. And most of all of the detail parts in this shot that you see in the end of the building of Roger's basically demo model and pilot model for the kit, but all of those little detail parts are detail parts that we manufacture, and they come from various sources. When we first took the business full time, when the wife came downstairs and told me at 2 o'clock in the morning to give my notice tomorrow because she needed to sleep and we couldn't afford for me to go to work anymore, about 6 months later, she came home and she thought she was painting figures, doing some things. We were undergoing an adoption at the time of our youngest son, and she really got into painting the figures, and we were constantly having issues finding detail parts to put on the locomotives that we were painting, the models that we were building. And the first thing that got us into manufacturing was we bought just the detail parts line from Lee and Jan Klaus that were the Valley Car Works. And we originally did spin casting of those parts in a mix master with a 5-inch spin tray. You know, the old articles that were in the Gazette that Bob Coffey and Bob Brown and those guys, I mean, yeah, the exact same concept, and it worked. But there's V&T Shop stuff there, which is another company reacquired. Just a mishmash of some Durango press parts in there that were all from different companies that we picked up over the years. But the detail parts are one of the strongest parts of our company. You know, even if we don't advertise it, you know, people shouldn't hesitate to check with me because I probably got it somewhere.
Well, I tell you, there's a lot of detail parts there.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Well, listen, before we go any further, let's bring in some of your friends so that we kind of get a fuller picture of exactly who Keith Wiseman is. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Jim Insko. Jim, welcome. How about telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to get involved with Keith?
Well, I'd known his dad for a long time. I worked for a refrigeration air conditioning company. We took care of the bank where Ted worked and fiddled with tractors, the antique tractors and stuff with him. And Keith actually called me one night with a problem on his furnace. And I tried to walk him through it on the phone, and I said, wait a minute, I'll just come over. Well, that was like, 8 o'clock at night. And we get the furnace fixed, and he started showing me the locomotives that he's painting on. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, I finally go home. So that's kind of how this got started. And, over the years, I've never modeled except in standard gauge. At that time, we were actually running a tourist train in Paris, and I was in charge of the mechanics on all of that. So, you know, long and short of it is Keith and I kind of got together off of a broken furnace.
Well, I know that you've got a couple of pictures here that you'd like to share with us. So let's take a look at some of these.
Well, I picked this one. It's not that good, but the guy in the blue shirt is Jim Barron, and his son is the other young man standing to the right of Keith. And Jim Barron and a couple of his friends actually had Trains of Texas. And I kind of wanted to get the 2 cents in about the history of some of the, you know, different companies that Keith ended up with. And that's one of them, and maintained some of those, you know, product lines and things. Well, and there's another one of the people that was, and I just went brain dead. Sam Halter was part of the Trains of Texas, and you all might know the other fellow right behind him there. That's Alan Pollock, a right big Missouri mammoth, as we called him. Alan's a people producer, for lack of a better description. He does figures, I think, in all scales, doesn't he, Keith?
Oh yeah, and he's past president of the NMRA.
Yeah.
And Sam Halter was Star Models, the resin passenger car kits that he acquired from Emery Goulash way back when. So, and that's now part of the stuff that we have. Quick side story: this particular scene, very dear friend of ours, Johnny Reed, Colonel Johnny Reed, to a lot of people that knew him, who was an NMRA contest chairman, absolutely tremendous modeler. He did everything 1954 style, but to see some of his layouts and some of the things that he did was just phenomenal, even by today's standards. Johnny passed, had his funeral, they read his will, and his will stated, this is verbatim, but it's very, very close: I leave my nephew 1 locomotive and 10 freight cars of his choice. The remaining of my model railroad items are to be distributed between Ted Wiseman, my father, me, Sam Halter, and Alan Pollock, and I wish I was there to watch them fight over it. That was the line in his will. So I went down, cleaned everything that wasn't attached to the layout off, brought it all up here, cleaned it all up, and then we essentially drew stalls to see who went first, and then one guy grabbed the locomotive, then another guy grabbed the locomotive, then another guy grabbed the locomotive, and we just went around till we were out of locomotives. And then we did the same thing on freight cars and so on and so forth. And it was just it was a real hoot of an evening, to say the least.
Nobody got killed.
Nobody got killed. So, yeah.
And this is a back head shot of Jim Barron, Trains of Texas, and you can see where he got his modeling skills.
Yeah. I'll be darned.
Jim was actually a graduate of either the New York School of Art or Juilliard's. I'm not sure which. He was part of Zora Duntov's crew on the development of the 1968 Corvette Stingray. He actually won a 24 hours race in Mexico City, he and a buddy of his. And he was part of Trains of Texas. He was part of the Missouri Locomotive Works with Al Pollock. And he also judged the art show at the state rodeo in Texas every year, which has several categories for every middle school and high school kid in Texas. And he did that right up till just months before he passed. And my kids referred to Jim as Uncle Jim. He was a pretty special guy in our world. So
he also worked for AMC.
And,
and I got to tell a story about that. It just popped back in my head. Jim designed the Gremlin parts of it and also the Gremlin emblem that was on the side of that car, which when he designed it, he passed it on up through the chain of command to get it approved. And it came back to him and everything was okay. And he looked at him, he says, you cannot use that damn emblem the way it is. And none of them had noticed that it had a penis.
No, testicle.
Yeah. So that he took every chance to be humorous about whatever serious situation was at hand. He saw the humor in everything. And this is a story all by itself. Keith, you tell it. Go ahead.
We went to Sacramento to pick up the back shop from Dave Brown's friends and family that had it set up for us to come get it. And this is basically what we found when we got there. This is all the back shop parts bins in the cases there. And if you notice a big pile of stuff in front of one of them, evidently at one point the anchor that held the top of it to the wall came out and all the parts dumped out. And rather than clean it up, you just dig through it to find the parts you need. But we brought all that home. Not all of it, but a lot of it. But it was quite an experience that trip was, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Those are memories. Those are memories you never forget.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When I walked out in the backyard and stepped on the ground, I darn near stepped on the water spout from the west side.
Yeah.
And then when I looked up, on back in the yard another 100 feet is the west side caboose #1.
Unbelievable.
In his backyard.
Which is now fully restored. So
yes, because of Keith, he made enough phone calls, talked to enough people to make sure that that Dave Brown's girlfriend, who was in charge of all of this, got it handed off to the right people.
Yeah, Paul Beckstrom helped a lot with that one as well. So yeah.
It's been interesting.
It sounds like it, and obviously a very close personal friend.
Very much.
Oh yeah, yeah. Jim's been there. If there wasn't anybody else in the world, I always knew that Jim would be there to help. And the one compliment I can give him, even further beyond than just being a friend, is, there's people in this world that know a little bit about a lot of things, and there's people that know a lot about a few things. Jimmy's one of those people that knows too damn much about everything.
Oh, that's quite a compliment, sir. Well, let's meet another one of your friends here, Bill Banner. Bill, welcome. How about telling us a little bit about your background and how you met Keith?
Boy, how did I meet Keith? Been so long, I forgot, actually. I think we worked on a couple of projects together and got to be friends over that, met at train shows and hung out a bit. I've been manufacturing building kits for 27 years now, and prior to that I was doing a lot of custom building. And Keith came in the picture and he started doing some white metal projects for us, and pretty soon I had him doing all the white metal stuff that we had in the kits, and here we are.
That sounds great. Well, I know you brought some photos too that you'd like to share with us, so let's see the first one of those.
Yeah, this is an S-scale. Why can't I think of what it is? The yellow thing there is something we're working on to produce as a kit at some point. Logging arch, that's what it is.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that
he
looks,
has all the, those are all 3D printed patterns, just some rough patterns. And
Yeah.
eventually we'll get it into white metal and produce it.
okay.
I think one thing to interject here is most people don't realize it, but most of us manufacturers out there, and there's different groups of them in different pockets, but we all help each other in lots of different ways. If we've got something that's laser cut in one of our kits, Bill did it, period. And I guess it's the same way white metal with him. And, we share, suppliers. Well, this guy's giving a good deal on rubber. This is who you ought to deal with, so on and so forth. And, it's kind of weird because you have a niche group where everything's okay to share, opposed to other industries I've been in the past where it was like, oh, well, we're using that metal and nobody else is going to find out what it is. It's a special alloy. That does nothing for the larger scope of things long term. It's what you do with the materials more so than what the materials are. So
Yeah, absolutely. How about this one, Bill?
These are a couple kits. The one on the right is RGS 02 snowplow, and boy, that goes back. I think Durango Press came out with it originally, and we've turned it into mostly laser cut parts for Keith's kit. He adds all the white metal and the plow blade. I think he's doing it in resin, and everything else goes with it. But those are the parts that we've cut for him. And the tower on the left, I forget the lineage of that, but it was taken from
quality craft.
Quality Craft.
Mm-hmm.
It was an old school kit. Basically, you got some sheets of wood and some white metal parts, and this is the laser cut version. Still using white metal windows and doors, but everything else is laser cut, and it's available from Keith.
Yep.
What scale is it in, Bill?
That's an O.
O scale? Are
Yeah,
both of those
both of them
models?
are O. Yeah.
Both of,
Yes.
It's an O-scale Pennsylvania tower.
okay.
More white metal parts, chimneys, and the water tank has all of the white metal parts made by Keith. That's an F scale version of the water tank we do. We also do an O scale version, and Keith does the white metal parts for those.
Fantastic.
This is a project that I revamped for our local nuclear power plant. And the photo on the right is how it was in the 60s. And the photo on the left is how it is or was currently. And essentially Keith I sent Keith a pattern, and he sent me some molds to make up the big old concrete blocks you see around the later version of the power plant. So it was an interesting project. It was kind of fun too. And now it sits in the museum since they've shut the plant down.
Looks like a huge model. How large is that?
It's 5 by 10, I think.
Jeez.
They brought it into my shop, and I revamped it, and they came and picked it up and put it in their museum.
Fantastic.
So,
all right. Well, let's turn to another friend, Jess Dozier. Jess, welcome.
Well, hello again.
So, can you tell us a little bit about who Jess is and how you met Keith?
Yeah, I think I might know some people on the call because I've been doing a build along, but I'm the owner of Hangman Creek Diorama, and I can just flat tell you it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Keith's help. Just period, right? Whether that be not just the parts I buy, but just from the kind of mentoring and the counsel he's given me, just how to get started. Where do I start? What's my risk? Right? What's reality? And Keith's always told me what what is, he's told me the good, the bad, here's what, here's some ways you got to look at this, right? Which, keeps you from having crazy expectations, but it also, keeps you on path. I think I started out just as a customer at Keith's, because he had a corner on the 0 and 3 market. I'm an 0 and 3 model to primary. And he, if you go to eBay, Keith has, Keith is the library, right? He's got the parts. And then in my goal to be self-funded as a modeler, I met some folks, I don't know how, but started picking up some estates, which in reality it's a reality of our hobby, right? Things get passed down and we resell them. And that's how I built my collection, is I picked up some estates and I kept some things I wanted. And I would reach out to Keith. I'd be, Keith, what is this worth? And he would always tell me, hey, it's worth this or not worth this, and make sure you get this, right? So he's always given me really, really good advice. And before I became a manufacturer, I built a layout with some friends called the Hangman Creek Lumber Company, which oddly enough to us developed a bit of a following, right? And some people started to ask me about, hey, man, you should make that into a kit, that structure, and some stuff that we had scratch built and some things we had done. And, first person I reached out to is I said, Keith, how do you do this? How do you go about this? And I had taught myself how to cast resin to some degree, but I'd always had asked Keith for advice, and I still do, right? So it sort of grew over time, right? And then I've got a good friend out who lives out in Tennessee that I go out and see once every year, maybe 2 years. And part of it's an excuse because Keith's close, and then I can head up to his place and go hang out in his shop. But what I'd say is, Keith has always given me great advice. He's never held to what, other friends have said, he's never held information back. And he's always told it like it is, right? He said, hey, don't get overexcited about thinking you're going to have instant success. You're not. It's going to take 2-3 years to build up. You got to just do good work. Over time, it'll build up. And he's always given me the, get on this group on Facebook. This is, people get to know you, but this is what you got. And, it's helped me because it's pretty much happened like he said. Over 2 or 3 years, my business is slowly building. But it's, just Keith's advice has helped. I can't even, and he's never charged me for that advice, right? He's never said, hey, so I can't explain. And he's done that for tons of other manufacturers. It's everybody. There's a lot of folks who wouldn't have our little businesses if it wasn't for not what he supplies, but for what his knowledge is, right? Like, and that's, as a friend, you can't really even quantify that, right?
No, you can't. Absolutely. Well, I know you also brought some photos, so would you like to show those?
Yep. So this is one of the kits I manufacture out of a bigger kit, but this is resin castings, but it's got a lot of keys, the brake gear, the Lincoln pin, the compressor, the block, the acetylene tanks, all the little stuff is from Keith. All the stuff in the background, there's the white metal is from Keith. What Keith has always been really good is I can talk to him about a vision of something I'm doing. And he said, oh, we got that. I have that. This little maintenance away car, which is done really well on its own. I got the pilot model done, and it was just, honestly, I felt it was missing something. And the compressor, this little portable air compressor, was one of the things that I knew he had. I got this in 3 days, and it helped me maybe get to the vision I wanted with the kit, right? And I got it in like 3 days. Keith is one of those folks that always has stuff on the shelf, and you get it quick, and so you're able to get done what you want to get done fast. And that, that's not how the hobby has always been, right? So it's made a big difference in my ability to keep my momentum going when I'm putting something together. So his parts have really helped me realize my vision as a manufacturer, right? And I think that that's something that's, is really helps me a great deal.
That sounds magnificent. Really does.
Yep. So Jim Barron's name has been mentioned, and I think Keith's got to tell the story. But one thing when you go to Keith's is he's got these display cases of historic models, and I think that there may be an upcoming show, Jim, right, where Keith focuses just on some of the things he's been able to, kind of, history that he's able to keep, right?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have a separate show on that with Keith, and we have to come up with a date sometime later this year. But it's just going to deal with the collectible pieces that he has in his collection and the history of them, and it's so important to me to have this documented so that people in the future can see the importance that we as modelers in the 21st century felt that the history of our hobby was so critically important to its future. And I think Keith is going to be able to document that for us. So I'm really looking forward to that part two of Keith's lifestyle. So go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, and this is part of Keith's collection. It was a shade that Jim Barron built that won some contests a ways back. But I literally see this in a shelf and I was like, Keith, I go, can I please take pictures? I mean, it's like Keith has a lot of these models that are just mind-boggling that other people have built or he's built. And if you're a modeler and you see this stuff, it inspires you. And I said, Keith, can I just look at? And I took 100 pics of this thing. But Keith, I mean, talk about like this thing is nuts. Like, yeah, I can't explain what it looks like in person.
And you really can't see in this picture, but Hungry Horse Timber Company was Jim's model railroad. And of course, with all his art background, all the lettering on the side of the locomotive and this great big fancy logo it's on the side of the tender, it was all done by hand. And you can take a picture of both sides and hold them up next to each other, and they're exactly alike. You can't find the variants. It's just, it's like a custom sign painter. I mean, once they see it, they just put it down and there it is. But there's about 10 or 15 different stories on that locomotive. Jim took me through them all one day. I don't remember many of them, but the one I do remember is there's a little dog up in the corner of the tender, and he said that's a model of his favorite little doggy, and that dog actually has some of the real dog's fur on its underbelly. So that was just the attention to detail that he took things and how everything kind of had a personal story to go with it, in the way. And that was a Kimtron Shea is what it started out as, probably a very basic build, but by the time he got done with it, it was nothing basic about it.
That's just an outstanding model. I mean, you may not be able to see all the details, but what I can see in this picture is just outstanding.
Texture.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I mean, this is one of my kits, and it's got, I mean, the Buddha motor quite a bit, the umbrella. I mean, they're all stuff that I've gotten from Keith. So again, this was the first kit, that I put out, and it was a learning curve type of deal. But Keith helped me realize my vision, right? So that's really helps me as a manufacturer a great deal. This next picture, these next couple, they're just too cool. So going to Keith's shop is a little overwhelming, right? If you ever can go and arrange it, Keith's a very welcoming host. But this is only a couple shelves of the molds, and I don't know how many there are, Keith. There's 5, 6 racks. I mean, at least this size.
About 4,900 last count.
Okay. So when I went out there to basically, I kind of committed to making a certain number of kits. And so I went out there and I basically worked with Keith, and we literally, with a gentleman that was working for him at the time, cast the metal for my kits, basically for my first few kits, and literally dug through wheels. He goes, oh, I know where that is. And I told him what I was looking. I said, I'm looking for this. Do you have this? He goes, yeah. It's over here. I don't know how he knows, but he knows where all this stuff is. He opens the wheels up, and and you look at them, and they're two sides of a half. They're not easy to tell what they are always, right? And he's like, oh no, this will be this. And he would spin it, off would go. And I said, okay, 50 of that, 50 of that, 40 of that, whatever. But the library that Keith has, it's just, it's insane. It's amazing. But when you go there and you just see kind of what he's been able to, not end up in a dumpster, because that's what happens to a lot of kit manufacturers is their stuff ends up in a dumpster. And, Keith has been able to salvage a lot of stuff that, we've been able to, again, keep moving forward in the hobby, right? And this next slide is one of how many shelves, I think?
Yeah, that's not, yeah. That's the front area that you see to the left of the photo is the white metal detail parts bins for stuff that we sell. Pretty much, if you see a numbered detail part on our website, they're in those bins. So some brass parts down at the other end. The part in the middle is basically a whole bunch of brass parts that we cleaned out of from builders in Korea. After Samhungsa closed, the builder I was working with basically just bought detail parts, and they used them as packing materials. They charged me for them, but they used them as packing materials when they sent us models. And we sorted them all out, and someday I'll figure out how to get them all marketed. But most people that visit here can spend a good hour or two at those bins just going, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. We got a couple other walls that look basically the same way. One of them's the back shop, the O-scale parts, and one of them's other parts we use in manufacturing, the grant stuff, the things that we supplement our kits with for parts that we don't make.
Yeah, and from going here, like for me to be able to just like, hey, well, look over there, start digging through them and see what you find, right? If you're like, if you're a visual person and you're trying to tell a story with something you're making, to be able to go to somewhere and actually have access to this, but also, Keith's like a encyclopedia. Like, he knows where everything is, where it came from, its story, and like that's it's hard to put how to quantify that, right? Like, but Keith's been able to, not from a business perspective, but I think a lot of it he's just driven to make sure this stuff survives and then moves forward, which is a big deal to me.
I would totally agree with that. Keith, we've had a question on the chat. One of the modelers wanted to know if you could give them your website address.
WisemanModelServices.com.
WisemanModelServices.com.
Yes, sir.
Got it. All right. Well, let me ask you this. So you started out as a modeler, and you decided at one point to go into business. Well, how did that come about? Why convert your model training hobby into a business?
Well, I spent years working for somebody else, like all of us do. And, they always say, find that one thing. And if you do that one thing, you'll never work a day in your life. And it really just hit me as an adult at a later stage when I really started doing the custom building. And of course, the manufacturing is all great, and that makes us a decent living. But we also supplement it greatly with the buying and selling of secondary market products. And we had some good custom painting customers that said, hey, we see you're selling some stuff for other people. And I got turned into a couple really, really large collections in the late 90s. One of which was an O-scale collection out of the Cincinnati area. And it had about 900 O-scale locomotives.
Okay.
And probably 2,000 cars. And the fellow was 93 or 4 when he passed, and the collection went from the early 40s right up to that current day. And I didn't know a lot about O-scale. I knew a lot about narrow gauge, knew a lot about building models and things like that. But that and the advent of eBay is really what allowed it to become a full-time business. The custom painting and the building was enough to supplement my hobby for us to take some fun trips and some things like that. But after that happened, and selling the collections, we find things that, aren't available anymore. And back during that period of extremely irrational exuberism, as some people used to put it, you'd put a $49 kit on there, and you couldn't get them anywhere. And there were 7 people that just had to have that kit. And all of a sudden you had a $500 kit. And the thing that transpired after that was the fact that, well, what happened to that company? Well, they, Bob died. Fred quit. He got a job, with the military, whatever it was. And, well, what happened to the stuff? Well, his wife still got it. So I started digging on the internet, finding old phone numbers, calling the old company number, writing letters, and asking questions a lot. And it just seemed like the company started to fall into line, and were able to pick up some very reasonably. Some the people still have because they weren't reasonable and nobody else had come along to buy them. But as those things added on, the more we added, it just kind of snowballed. And I think about 8 or 9 years ago, about the time we moved to where we are now from the previous place, my wife said, look, we're not going to work as hard. We're doing fine. And she even wrote up a contract that I wouldn't buy any more companies or expand the business any. And of course, I signed it and everything else. But anyway, I think we bought like 8 other little small companies since then. But I've refused more than I've purchased at this point. But that brings a side note that's important. I think is how important in this lifestyle that I have and what I've been able to accomplish. It really needs to be more what we have been able to accomplish, because she's the bean counter. She's the keeper of the cookie jar. She has a stronger knowledge of this stuff than most people would ever believe that she does. And has been the driving force behind me to make sure that we were able to do what we wanted to do and have the business succeed. And I think it's very important to give that credit where it's due. And she's a pretty darn good modeler too, but she doesn't do it much. So she's more into the ceramics and the pottery type stuff. So.
But it sounds like eBay, when eBay came along, that was really one of the driving forces for your company.
It was. I mean, we're without a doubt one of the eBay success stories. I mean, we're not huge as some of them were, but it made us not require somebody else to provide us a paycheck. We were able to do it on our own, and unfortunately, it's still neat. It still works. It's not the horse it used to be, but it's still a very worthwhile way. And we built our business on eBay. I mean, we had a little tiny website. We just basically said who we were, had a few products for sale, and for 8-10 years, that was our only marketing, and other than a magazine ad here and there, and it worked quite well. And in some cases, I'll say better, because somebody saw it. Oh, that's neat. I'll buy it, and they bought it. Rather than have to make 2 or 3 steps to get to where the point of purchase was. So, but it's.
Let me ask you this: I talk to a lot of people, a lot of modelers, and they have an idea for a kit, or somebody says, "Yeah, I really like your modeling. You ought to go into business and so forth." What do you say to those people? What are the pros and cons of becoming a model railroad manufacturer?
Well, I always said I wanted to work for myself so I could work when I wanted to. I learned later that it means if you're awake, you're working. And, or your mind, if you're not physically doing it, your mind is working and thinking about something that you're going to do later. I guess the big advice I would give is, like Jess was saying earlier, you can't go by Athearn and turn the key at the front door and expect it to work. You've got to, I mean, some people can, but you've got to be able to be willing to work at it. Just because you're a good modeler and a highly talented individual making things doesn't mean you know anything about business. Uh, I happen to have a little bit of a business knowledge based on some of my past in the electronics business, previously in the computer business. But my wife had the financial knowledge, how to manage the money. She had an accounting degree, has one, and how to make things work correctly. And of course, I was a salesman, always have been. Ice cubes to an Eskimo, how many you want, But but the big thing was you've got to have a drive and you've got to have a passion for it. If you don't enjoy it, it's not going to work. If you've got 7 other passions at the same time, it's probably not going to work. You can't be a rock climber. You can't be a motorcycle racer. You can't do 7 other things and then come right back and pick it up. I know some people, and in fact, a couple of the companies I have were people that thought, oh, this would be cool. It'll be fun. I'll become a model train manufacturer. We can set up at the shows. We'll be a rock star. This will be fun. Well, they got the company and found out, oh, hell, this is work, because you have to take care of things. The second biggest piece of advice is I can give to anybody that wants to do something like this. You see a problem, you stop what you're doing, you fix the problem, you resolve that problem, then you come back to what you were doing. If somebody calls up and, their kit didn't get a part it was supposed to, well, you don't make a note, set it over to the side, go eat dinner, play with the dog, whatever. You go get that part, you put it in a bag, you put it in an envelope, and you send it out the next day. You respond to things quickly. You tell everybody exactly what the truth is. If you don't have the kit, say, hey, it's going to be 4 weeks before I have a chance to make that. You want your refund, or do you want your kit in 4 weeks? 99% of the time, I don't care. 4 weeks is fine. It's just going to sit on my shelf instead of yours, but there's just straight up, straightforward, honest with everybody about everything, and do what you say you're going to do. There's a lot of people who've gone down a bad rabbit hole because they said they were going to do things and didn't do it, regardless of what the business is. But to a big degree, the basic principles of business, work in this one as well, but you got to have a passion for what you're doing.
Gotcha. Let's change the subject here a minute. What about 3D printing?
Wow.
Is that changing the manufacturing part of our hobby? Where is 3D printing taking our hobby?
Well, 3D printing is simplifying the builds in a great deal many ways. Probably a very strong percentage of anything you're seeing manufactured overseas coming in XYZ companies, fancy box that you drop on the track and ready to run. That all began from 3D printed and then CNC molds, which is basically inverted, 3D printing in a lot of ways, and then hand assembled. But 3D printing and manufacturing, in my opinion, has its place for developing prototypes. And we've done that in some cases with some of our kits, where we took some of the old HO scale vehicles and brought them up to O scale to allow those to be available in O scale. We had a very good artist do all the artwork for us, and he printed the parts. He sent me the parts, and I refined them, cleaned them up, developed a technique to convert them to white metal, destroyed a lot of parts, in that process, and then we found a technique that works. But refine those parts and then use those parts for your master patterns for your production work, and things turned out beautifully. There are many cases that I feel that 3D printing in some ways is hurting our hobby as well as many others. People have the opportunity to do beautiful drawings and everything else, and in some cases average drawings, and they print it, and I think the excitement of this thing appearing on their table overshadows the quality of the model it is. And I think there's a lot of 3D printed stuff out there that people are like, oh gosh, this is so neat, I love this model, it's so cool. when if you really look at it from a standpoint of a serious modeler, or is it an accurate representation of the prototype? A lot of them aren't, or they're not actually made in a way that something would work longer than a week on a real railroad, regardless of the size of the railroad. But I think in some cases it has the ability to drop the threshold, but in other cases it allows us to make things that in other ways we couldn't make. You know, you have multiple complex parts with 8 or 10 curves. You know, you can't make that as one piece, you know, with all the normal casting techniques.
Right.
But, and it varies on different aspects of the hobbies, because I've seen some 3D printed parts outside of model trains that are absolutely incredible, but I don't think people are getting $1 million parts out of $200 machines.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Bill, you and Jess are manufacturers. What's your feel about 3D?
I mean, it's got its place. I think it's good for making patterns and low run parts. There's a 3D printer right behind me that I use on certain parts. Is it changing anything? I don't think so. I think Keith is right in the fact that a lot of people are trying to make parts with low-end 3D printers that just look not very nice. You can when you can see all the step lines from the print, and like he was saying, I've seen people that say, "Oh, this is a great little model here. You know, we're making these for sale." You know, I mean, it's not usually something you want to even give to your brother. It's so rough, and yeah, I think it's just an added tool to build models with. I don't think it's a, you know, I don't think it's as revolutionary as laser cutting is. I think laser cutting made the biggest impact on manufacturing kits in the model railroading, at least from a kit perspective. 3D printing, I don't think it's there. Maybe someday, but it's, you know, you can put a 3D printer on your shelf behind you, and there's one right here, as I said, but can I sit down and draw up a 3D part? No. I call a friend of mine and he makes the drawing for me. It's a whole different software approach to making the parts. And, you know, buying the 3D printer is the easy part. Learning to drive that software, that's a big project. And I've been to school several times trying to and learn the software. But the problem is, if you don't stay with it and work on it nearly every day, it's gone. Yeah. Right. So I'll go to school, I'll learn about 3D printing and CAM software and so forth, make some parts, get home, spend the next 6 weeks on the lasers, working on my 2D drawings, and then say, right, I'm ready to sit down and make a 3D part. Yeah, it don't happen.
How about you?
I call up Al and say, Al, would you make this part for me? So an hour later, the part's on the email and I'm ready to go. That's what I do.
How about you, Jess?
You know, I think I see it the same way. Like when, again, I generally, I'll see a picture of something and I'll be like, wow, that has to be a kit. That, and I'm not in the laser cutting business because honestly, I don't know what Bill knows. And so it's just not a path I've gone down, you know, and there's a lot of amazing laser cut stuff out there. And I wanted to do something different, right? I wanted to see things. I'm like, man, that's really cool. How do I make that? And the first thing I do is I go, okay, can that be white metal? Does Keith have it? And then, you know, like an example I use is I do have one of my kits is a centrifugal pump sled. And it's this really cool centrifugal pump. And the only way it could have been done, it is not easily castable in resin. It could be done in brass, but let's not go down that rabbit hole because, you know, that's a specialty thing that is, I want to make some money. But the 3D print, I've got a guy that I work with, and to Bill's point, you know, it's a cool, you know, it was able to realize my vision, but my modeling is pretty weathered. It's pretty beat up. It's pretty backwoods. That's my style. So I was able to weather and work away the print lines and, you know, some of the imperfections in it. But I also used Keith's white metal. It's got strip wood. It's got my resin casting. So to me, it's part of, it's something that I can make it as maybe a part of realizing a vision, right? But it's got a ways to go to be able to, to really, like to Keith's point, I've seen some stuff that I'm just like, wow, okay, well, good for them. They're selling them, but I just don't think it's that great. So I think it's got its place, but I think it's got a ways to go to be able to do the numbers it needs to do cost effectively, right? To really be, but I think, again, combination of hydrocal resin, laser cutting, strip wood, all of it, resin casting. That's how, if you use all the mediums that are available to you, you can make white metal, you can make some amazing stuff. But
Yep.
to me, it's just part of telling the story you want to if you're a manufacturer.
Gotcha. Well, let me try to change the subject again. What do you see as the future of the model railroad market? Do you see some segments or some scales growing, other scales not so much or dying? What's the market like? I mean, it used to be dominated. Everybody was an HO. Everybody was going to be an HO model. Well, what is it today? What do you see the market going?
I think HO is still probably the dominant spot for new modelers, along with N-scale, and for a lot of the newer type products, modern prototype, etc. O-scale seems to be, I don't want to say it's not growing, but I don't think it's stagnant or falling off by any means. I think we're bringing on new modelers to that scale, especially if you consider in the ON30 side of it. But I think its boom's kind of reaching its peak because of the lack of new things to bring people into it, or to excite people, because there hasn't been a whole lot of new quote unquote mainstream products in ON30. But you're going to see, because you're going to see the Lionel toy train set story all over again. There were millions of Hogwarts and Thomas the Train Engine sets sold over the years. I think we're about to the point where we're going to see a generation start to think about things like that. Recently, one of my kids just got his 4-year-old into building a model, and of course, then he started building something much more complex. So, of course, he's been exposed to it his entire life, but it wasn't model trains yet. But we're seeing a huge boom right now. If you pay attention to other hobbies, the plastic model industry, airplanes, cars, things like that, is absolutely on an explosion curve right now. Radio control cars and radio control vehicles are a huge deal. I don't know about airplanes, because radio control airplanes and control line stuff, because I haven't been that exposed to it for years. But the radio control cars, I mean, Lexington, Kentucky near here has an indoor RC track, and they have slot car drag racing and all kinds of stuff like that. And we've got one little train store that's been there for 30 some odd years, but it's predominantly 3-rail and some secondhand HO and things like that. So, the big major hobby shop in this area we don't have anymore, and really neither does Cincinnati. I mean, until we get to a point where Joe consumer walks into Walmart, Hobby Lobby, major retailers, and sees a train set, because we don't have the wish list catalog anymore with that train set we all had to have, or the slot car track anymore. So there's and the unfortunate side of it is we actually have a certain percentage of our hobby that is leaving us, and going somewhere else in their quest. But there's growth to be had. I don't think it's dead by any means. I think the interest in narrow gauge has made some big differences, and it can be, we have a tendency to think that we have a little bit of a tunnel vision that everything we think is happening in the world in the hobby is happening right here in the good old US of A. Well, that's not necessarily true. There are other countries that are still very strong in modeling. A lot of Europe still is very, very strong. And if you pay attention on some of the European chat rooms, it seems like there's a train show somewhere in England or France or Germany every day, almost, every weekend at least. And they're not tiny shows by any means. So it's and Japan's the same way. But overall, it's just a matter of, I think once people get bored with their heads stuck in their phones, we may see a bigger resurgence in hobbies all around, regardless of whatever craft or hobby it may be.
Well, with the pandemic and the rising cost of just about everything that we're buying now, what do you see for the future of the train show? Is that going to be going the same way as the hobby shops?
I hope not, because it's always fun to find those bargains, and that used to be, and that's the thing that the internet did do. The one negative thing that the internet did do, it created the world's greatest, in eBay, for instance, became the world's greatest yard sale there for a while. The fun part of going to the train show was to find that holy grail piece. You had 2,000 people show up for an air gauge engine, and you almost had a fist fight on the aisles of who was going to get that West Side number 9 that somebody had for sale. And that's kind of gone because you've been able to find that stuff. It's not a matter if you can find it; it's a matter of when it's going to show up.
Yeah.
But the train shows have their place. The pandemic definitely hurt the train shows. It'll take a while for them to build back, I think. I personally haven't been to, I think the last show I went to was 2016 or 2017 and was Chicago March Meet.
Yeah.
And the last national convention I went to before that was 2015 in Kansas City, the Narrow Gauge Convention. And even as a manufacturer, and I think Bill will attest to this too, and maybe Jess as well, we come out with a new product, we're not going to go show it at a convention for the first time and take 50 with us and hope we sell them all. No. The day we put that thing in the box, we've taken pictures, it's on the internet, it's on our website, it's on eBay, it's on Facebook, we've marketed it everywhere, and those that had to have it bought it right then and there. They didn't wait for the convention to buy it. So I think that affects it as well. But the thing that really seems to be to me that is just crazy is the not only online but the in-person auctions of secondhand stuff.
Yeah.
I had a recent experience with my father. My dad was a John Deere nut. If it was green and yellow, he had 3 of them basically. And he had a monster collection of die-cast vehicles, mostly 1/16 scale. He was an exhibitor at couple of the national conventions where you're invite only. So he had those special tractors. The John Deere tractor in the movie Seabiscuit that backfires and scares the horse. Well, that's my dad sitting on his tractor. So kind of gives you an idea. But his die-cast were worth nothing online. And took them to a local auction house, and they got almost double on everything for what I was asking for it online, and so it seems like some of those aspects, and there's other auction houses out there in the train industry that, I just shake their head and go, well, I just need to take them a truckload. What am I doing all this work for? So you never know. It's kind of all over the board, so to speak.
Well, let me ask this question because this comes from Tony Dixon, who's on our YouTube channel. He says, Keith has some wonderful parts. Only question I have is, are we going to have anything new coming in S scale, preferably post-transition era parts or kits?
At this point, with as large as this business is, with as much as I have here that I haven't done yet, that's still sitting there in molds waiting for me to cast some up and make them available, it's pretty much at the point where if you make the patterns, if you do everything on the front end, I'll be more than happy to do the production. More so than the designing and everything of kits. And it's just not really, I pretty much got all I can handle at this point, and probably 3 times as much as I can.
Gotcha.
Start a
trying to
kit
pry
card,
stuff.
not that hard.
I'm trying to pry stuff out of Keith that I'm like, Keith, you're not going to get to it. Let me buy it. But I don't want to pay much for it, but let me buy it because you're not going to get to it. Right. I mean,
Yeah. But, yeah, there's certain aspects that I would definitely trim from the pile here that I'm never going to get to, that it's almost criminal, the fact that some of this stuff isn't out there for somebody to do with. Some of it's obsolete, but some of it has a lot of very good possibilities in the market. Just the time's not here to do everything. So
I understand. Well, let me ask you this. You were a modeler, just a regular modeler before you got into being a tycoon in business.
Yeah, right.
So let me break this question down. So let's just talk about your modeling for you personally.
Right.
Well, we'd like to see some of that. We'd like to hear you talk about your modeling and how you feel about it when you're just sitting down building for Keith Wiseman. This is my model. And I know we've got some pictures that we can show of the kind of models that you have built just for Keith Wiseman.
Right.
So you go ahead.
For me, it's almost that there's a technical side of things with, if there was a nut bolt and washer on the real one, I want to try to make sure there's a nut bolt and washer on the model, to a point where it's visual and can be seen. And then personal flares and personal artistry and attention to detail, and attention to detail being more than just putting parts on. The weathering aspects of it have always been fun to me, but the relaxation I guess I get when I really sit down and build a model is probably more when you're done than when you're actually building it. But solving problems, seeing something that, the worst thing anybody could ever do is say, oh, well, you can't do that. Well, I'm not going to sleep till I do in some cases, but it's kind of I always got a lot of enjoyment from it. And I guess, and maybe it's just me, but being able to point at something after it's done and go, ha, I did that, so that's kind of that's always kind of a good feeling too. An even better feeling if somebody comes up and tells you what you did wrong, then you have to go fix it. But that's a different story altogether. But
well, let's see another one of these pictures.
Okay.
How about this one?
Yeah, that's a little. That's one of the kits we offer. It's an HO scale B Series Mack truck, and some people may remember it as a Lee Town years and years ago. And a fellow by the name of Fran Wilson down in Florida acquired that line of kits from Lee Snover before it was sold off to whoever Lee sold the bulk of it off to. And one that we brought back, and that's one of the little trucks that I built up out of that line when I brought that stuff back out several years ago.
I'll be darned. Next.
This is one I built. This is a Backwoods Miniatures brass and predominantly brass and part white metal kit, articulated locomotive that Backwoods Miniatures did. That's one I built when I was doing professional model work, and just an intricate head scratcher in some ways, but super, super neat the way it came out.
Boy, I'd say that's gorgeous. Next photo.
This little engine is kind of a funny story. Roger Malinowski was doing a kit for his, he did an oil derrick, and he wanted a steam engine to run the oil derrick. And he said, I got to have something. I know you got something. He didn't like or didn't want to deal with some other manufacturer that had something similar. And I had an air compressor that was basically based on these parts that came from the old V&T shop stuff. And I got down to whittling and figuring out and came up with this little horizontal steam engine that we manufacture. And Roger said, I don't like it. It's too little. So, so it became a kit in our line, and we ended up modifying and coming up with a stationary version of the Case steam tractor you saw a while ago, of the steam engine off of it, that we developed a stationary version. So this was kind of a side effect kit that has been very popular and done quite well for us. That was actually not supposed to happen. You know, it just kind of poof, there it was. So an extra, so to speak.
Next.
This is a kit that there's questions about whether or not Dale Darney ever put it out. We went from his patterns and everything else and got it developed, but it's a it's an O scale 0-3, can be made 0-30, but it's basically a derelict C16. You know, part of the lagging's gone. The locomotive's been sitting on the siding for years, whatever, and kind of had fun figuring out how that was going to work, and getting that developed as one of our kits as well. And we do it in 2 scales, HO as well. And you know, that's one thing to say about Dale Darney. Most people don't know who he was. A company called the V&T Shops. He was part of Classic Miniatures originally. He was part of Dar Scale Models, and became the V&T Shops. And Dale was a architect by trade, but an absolute tremendous modeler. And out of all the companies we've acquired, I just got to give props, because his pattern work that he did for both resin parts and for the white metal parts and brass masters that he built were just impeccable. And I don't think his company ever had the manufacturing techniques and capabilities that we have today to get that quality out of the parts. But man, some of the stuff he has done is just artwork, absolute artwork. And when you for a ditcher, for instance, and it's got 245 individually put on rivets, and they're in a perfect straight line, you know, on a little piece that's maybe 3-4 inches long. It's just amazing. And he had a lot of vision, and there's a lot of things I still need to do that he did that haven't gotten done yet. So, but neat stuff.
That kind of knowledge, that kind of modeling ability, gosh, I hope we don't lose that in our hobby.
Yeah. The ability to, well, you know, the old adage is build it exactly like the plan, and and you'll get it. This is a Dolbear Donkey engine, originally done by Gordon Cannon, and he developed all the patterns, and it was later done by a company called Hetchy. And this was the model that I built so we could sell the kits. And it was funny because the Hetchy line got sold to the same people that owned Evergreen Hill Designs. And at the time they did that, they had no interest in O scale. So this stuff sat in mothballs with the fellow that was the injection molder, and he was a big injection molding guy. And the reason he got out of the hobby, does live steam now, but he didn't patent it, but he made the hard tools to make the first AIDS-free needle way back when.
I'll be darned.
So he didn't have to worry about making model train kits to make a living, and started playing with live steam. And, you know, I asked something about it to Lee Snover one day, just yakking on the phone, and he goes, oh, so-and-so's got that. Give him a call. And I called him and I talked to him about it. And this is what's really funny. And we discussed the price and everything else. And he said, he said, well, he said, I'll figure out what I got to have. He said, I'll send you the patterns to look at. And he said, I'll put an invoice in the box. And I said, okay, fine. And I got the patterns in and all the parts. And of course I told him I had a sample kit, so I knew what went in it. And a little box of brass patterns and some other stuff. And the note says, hope you can make yourself and some other people happy by making this kit. You don't owe me nothing. And Bill does the laser cutting for parts of the skids, but that was the one I built up for the sample model, so people could see what they hopefully see what it should look like when they're done.
Gotcha. How about this one?
That is a little branch lines marketed for ON30 brass kit out of the UK. It's probably 143rd. I don't know for sure, but I built that one when I was first doing a lot of custom building. At the time I was doing a lot of work for Sam Furukawa from Japan. Mm-hmm. And I figured we needed a motor car to take us to the bar and back. And if you notice, the driver's got a beer mug in his hand.
Yeah.
But that little, and of course I changed the pilot, used different wheels than what came with the kit and kind of de-Britished it, so to speak. But the lighting worked. It had sound. It was a pretty amazing little model. And I've seen recent pictures, and Sam still has it in his collection, so it makes me feel pretty good. So,
well, let's change this a little bit. So, if you're building for yourself, that's what you'd build, and you really enjoyed that. But now you're a kit manufacturer. Now you're a model railroad manufacturer. So now, what's the difference? I mean, you build the same, you build at the same level, or?
You almost have to build. You can't really build to what makes you happy. You've got to build to what is correct. In some aspects of it, Jess can cheat because he's selling a theme and an idea more so than selling a 1916 auto car truck that has to be dimensionally correct and so on and so forth. Or if you were making a World War II airplane, you can't just do a Mustang anymore. You've got to do Fred Jones's Mustang that shot down 7 zeros on the 4th of December. And that's kind of, doesn't really happen that way as much, but I think that's what kind of always had me lean more toward to the narrow gauge and backwoods stuff, because they built stuff out of necessity with what they had, rather than ordering 1,000 of them from American Car and Foundry where they were all exactly the same. But yeah, when you're building for somebody else, you're building what they want. When you're manufacturing something, you really have to a degree, get it technically correct. And then kind of expand from there with whatever flavor you want it to have.
All right, now here's something that you produced.
Right.
Tell me about this.
Well, this was actually the first model we imported under the Wiseman name. Overland Models imported a boatload of ditchers way back when, late 80s, early 80s actually. Korean builder had a whole bunch of parts left over, and we made quite a few refinements and some changes and some things like that. There was some research involved with that, but one of the best parts about these models is the original ones, they had little rollers on the side where you could roll it back to set your boom at whatever height you wanted to, which is visible on the other side of this model. But they never would stay where you put them. And the builder was visiting the United States, came to visit me. We're standing in my shop, and he speaks English about as well as I speak Korean. But we developed a language with what we knew enough between each other, with drawings and writings and so on and so forth. And he and I together sat there and basically engineered a way to spring load those drums with a notch on them. So when you turned it, it would fall into a keyway and hold the drum in that position, opposed to, you know, putting it where you want it, putting a drop of super glue on it. And I always thought that was just one of the neat stories about how you know, two people that have the same goal can figure it out no matter what the situation may be.
Well, it's a beautiful model. You
Oh
still
yeah.
still import them?
Oh no. This was 2002, 2003.
Okay.
We did those. We did a pile driver version, and we did a version that came with both booms. We had them for mounting on a flat car, and we had them for the full truck version like this. And but did okay with them. If I'd have bought IBM stock instead of imported brass models, I wouldn't have time to talk to you now.
How about this one?
This was one that we did with the same builder. If you look closely, it's a Bachmann ON30 T-boiler shape. And we designed and developed a different cab and boiler for them. They were a brass import. And we did a couple hundred of each version. We had a more modern version with an extended wagon top boiler. And then later now we actually manufacture the same kit in white metal and resin and with a laser cut cab. But it's there's a lot of design work went into that one, more so than actual modeling, but on my own, other than building this one. And well, actually a lot of modeling went into them because 100 of them had the saddle for mounting it to the frame in the one place, so I had to fix 100 models.
All right, Nick. I love that one.
Yeah, this is one of the Mishkal number 5 models that we imported, and was basically a stock black model, and that's the weathering and all the attention that I gave it for a particular customer that wanted it weathered that way.
That's just beautiful modeling.
Yeah, thank you.
Next.
Whaleback Tender, which one of our more popular kits. That particular model was built by Les Davis, and Les built it for us for a demo model, but that was a project that Dale Darney had started and never brought to fruition. And you know, one of those, what's this in a drawer one days, and you know, 3 hours later we were pouring molds and had a kit to work with. So I take a little bit of credit for that one.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yeah. This particular kit's just a kind of a menagerie photo of all the type of different things that kind of an overview. It's showing some of the McKenzie iron and steel kits that we have now, the old Bill Roy stuff, some things that we've developed, big donkey engine in the back, which everybody thinks is G scale, which is actually O scale. And that's an SN3 freight car in front of it to give you an idea of size. So, and an O scale truck, but yeah, it's a little bit of, yeah.
All right. I tell you, it's just amazing to me because there is a difference, really, to me, at least in the way you talk about the kits versus your personal building. So I appreciate that. Keith, your level of construction and the amount of detail that you talk about must take you an extraordinary amount of time in research. So how do you do all of that research?
Well, it started back there when I was a sick kid in the bed in 3rd grade, you know, and and remember a lot of it. You know, we have this wonderful tool called the Unimind that we're talking on right now that gives us the ability to find out way more than we should, but have had my head stuck in books for years. I think if a narrow gauge modeler or not, but I think 2 of the most valuable pieces of research material on the planet is a complete set of narrow gauge and short line gazettes, and and the second one would be a complete set of mainline modelers.
Yeah.
Between the two of them, you can find out almost every technique, who made what when, and so on and so forth. And then just, general books. And if you want to find out about something bad enough, you'll figure out a way to do it.
You got
Really?
a few sets of those in the trailer.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. How about this one? This looks like it required an awful lot of research to get
Well,
done.
yeah, that's the same one we saw earlier with the longer roof that was all weathered up. This is essentially the way they came in from Korea, just to give you a compare and contrast between,
Yeah.
what my quote unquote paintwork and how it was originally. But this is the shorter version. This was the construction number 21, and didn't have as long a roof, and essentially basically the same locomotive, but a few little minor differences in the appearance. But this was one of our other imports.
Keith, who were the people who really helped you learn how to big build it?
Tug Wilson and Sam Halter were, both being local and both being O-scale modelers. When I kind of made this, they were very, I was that cool kid playing with HO, and when I started messing with O and 3, everybody got a little bit more, with the guys around here anyway, a little bit more forthcoming, and really watching other people and what they did and what level of work that they put into it. And I think for a new coming modeler, building scale models, building serious models, I think the thing that I learned more from than anything, terminology, construction techniques, everything else, one of those items would be build a Grant Line box car, stock car, flat car kit. Because they tell you what each piece is, they give you a number, and you go look at the plans and you go, oh, that's that thing. And for the rest of your life, that's a K brake cylinder.
Right.
And I think in my case, the old fine scale miniatures kit taught you how to paint, how to weather, how to do a lot of things way back when. And I have to give George some props on that. But and there's several other kit manufacturers, Bill and Jess both as well, and try to incorporate it into some of my stuff. Is we try to continue to teach those techniques, and what works and what doesn't. But and those magazines, those old magazines, there's more wealth lost in those old magazines than you'll ever find on the internet.
You're right about that. Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned a few minutes ago that one of the real thrills being a modeler is to finish a model and be able to sit back and look at it and say, I built that. Mm-hmm. But before you get to that point, you're building the model and you sit back and you look at it and you say, yep, that's finished. It's time. I don't need to do anything more. That model is finished. How do you know that? How do you know when you look at that model that, quote, it is finished?
They never are. You'll always find something. You can look at that model 10 times and go, it's perfect. I love it. It's finished. You take it over to where you take pictures. You take 4 pictures of it. You go look at those pictures on your computer and you go, what a dummy I am. How did I miss that? You can, you can reach a point where you're finished and you're satisfied, certainly. But I don't think there's any way to, and yeah, they're out there. But the absolute perfect models are few and far between, so to speak. But it's a matter of reaching a level where you're satisfied with that model where it is.
How about this one? Is this one finished?
Is that one finished? No, it's raw, unpainted to be a demo model, and really kind of one of those things to say, yeah, it will go together.
Mhm.
John Coots of Scale Structures Limited had a little side company called Steamboat Springs Model Works, and they advertised a couple times in the Gazette. And this was going to be his idea of a composite narrow gauge white metal and brass locomotive kit. And several people were involved, West Side Models, Precision Scale, so on and so forth. And when I bought one of the other companies I got, all this stuff was tied up somehow in it. And I just got to dinking and playing with molds one day and said, well, maybe I can build this thing. And as far as I know, this was the second one ever built. John Coots built one, and Dick Truesdale, who was West Side Models Company, said John brought it over all excited about the fact that he had it running and it was really cool. And he said he ran it right down my track, and he said the dag thing hopped off the trestle and busted into about 700 pieces. And I said, well, that's real neat, John. And I walked out. So, and from that point on, it basically died until I got it. And I've sold quite a few. I sell them as parts sets. There have been some people that have developed gearboxes for them and sent me pictures of them running around on their layouts. So, and it's HON3. It's tiny.
Yep, absolutely. You know, a few minutes ago when you were talking about some people and the skills that they had, you talked about, well, he graduated from this art school, or he had this kind of degree as an artist. And when you look at your models, do you look at those as a piece of art? Are they a piece of sculpture in your mind? What does art, how much do you think art plays in modeling?
I think it's huge, because it's every one of us that are doing this, especially building layouts and painting backdrops and so on and so forth. But the thing that I got from model railroading, even as a youth, was how much you learn of practical knowledge of how things work. You learn basic metalworking, you learn basic woodworking, you learn how to stud a wall, you learn how to make something mechanical work that wouldn't, troubleshooting skills. But from an art standpoint, that's the beautiful thing about art. You know, you can put up a blank canvas and hang it in an art museum and people talk about how fabulous it is. But so everybody has a different perception of what art is. But if you take a serious model, you personalize it, you do it correctly, and you present it in a fashion that's unique to you, or an appropriate rendition of what the prototype was, yeah, it's art, because it's reproducing, you know, what was real, or creating something that's imaginary and stimulating your mind. And you know, if it weren't for model trains and airplanes and boats and those type of arts that we have, we'd all be sitting here talking about the dollhouses we're building.
Sure. That's true. Well, I think we've got some pictures here of this, Phil.
What's that?
There we go.
That's one of the kits we manufacture. And speaking of an art major, Bill Roy, this was one of his kits at McKenzie Iron and Steel.
Huh.
And Kevin Kuzman, who is probably one of the most artistic modelers I know, built this one for me for our demo models. He's an absolute fabulous model. Everything he does looks like this. And he also does Indy cars, manufactures Indy car kits, and we help him with that stuff. But yeah, just I mean, that just jumps out to you and says, "Oh, look at me," and that's art in my opinion. You know, when it makes you look at it more than just a glance, you know, that's not a brand new UP diesel going by. That's something special. Look at it, you know.
Yeah. I love this.
Another one of the kits we manufacture, little blacksmith car. We acquired the Calaveras model work stuff several years ago, and John Schofield friend of mine and Jess's, and I like obviously Jimmy knows him. He basically did all of the legwork on the parts to be cast in resin on this kit and built the sample model for me, and it's quite neat. Yeah, love that with all the details and everything.
Boy, if that's not a piece of art, I've never seen one. That is just outstanding.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
Next, yeah, there we go.
This is what happens when one of your customers sends you a bone stock 16-ton T-boiler Shay and says, I don't care, Keith, do whatever you want to with it. Just make sure it's neat. And I built this one for Travis Glass, 98, 99. Delivered it to him at the, I think I had it at the Santa Clara convention in the contest room. And two Bachman Shays got more votes, which I thought was hilarious. But anyway, it was later featured in one of the magazines, and just loved the model, and ended up buying it back at one point. So it's actually here in my collection now again. So he changed scales, and I said, well, I don't care what you do, I want that piece, and I bought that back from him.
Keith, what advice would you give, or what tips might you give to a new hobbyist coming in that wants to be a model builder?
I guess the advice that I would give is don't try to take on too much at once. You know, don't start the hobby with a Marion steam shovel tractor. Yeah, with a Case steam tractor, a Marion steam shovel. You know, start with small kits and work your way up and learn the terminology. And you know, you start with a small plastic model of an airplane kit. You don't start with a 395 piece B-17 kit. You know, yeah. And I guess the biggest thing that hampers many modelers is a space to work, proper tools. You're much better off to have too many good tools that you don't use very often than not have them and have a shelf full of models you'll never build because you don't have the tools to do it.
Keith, at this stage of your life, where are you going with your modeling, with your business?
Well, the business is continuing on. Looking for, going to hit a point in life where, some of it needs to go some different directions and let other people share in the glory. But we also have other hobbies that have developed because, the model train hobby was everything. And then, this is every day now. And my wife and I made the mistake of stopping at a car show one day. And now she's got a street rod pickup truck, and I've got a '61 Chevy in the garage, and those have been passions. But the funny thing about it is, it doesn't sound real, but model railroading has really affected that hobby too, because once you get to that certain attention to detail that you're used to, it carries over in everything else you do. You can't put one wire tie on that bundle of wires. You got to put the wire ties every 6 inches evenly everywhere throughout the car, so everything looks correct and the way it should be. But it's the hobby will continue for me at some point. Maybe if I ever clean out all this junk you see behind me, I'll have room to build a layout. I actually have a logging layout. We purchased the Coon Creek Lumber Company from Lou Julian's family. Mm-hmm. It's in Jimmy's warehouse. Can't seem to get it in one spot to put it together and or find the space to do it. But at some point we will. And I'll continue to play with new ideas and build things that are of interest to me. And I've got a stack of half done stuff that I need to finish. Like everybody else. So.
Well, listen, this is for your friends now to comment about, because we're getting close to the end here, and I'd like to hear from your friends any comments that they'd like to make and before we close? So Jim, how about you?
Well, something Keith didn't bring up with the acquisition of all of these companies that he's picked up over the years, he kind of alluded to it, but one of the things that he's learned is you may have 50 products in that line, but you probably only have 2 that are currently viable. So it was a good deal to buy it. And then you've got to figure out after you've got it, what portion of it is sustainable. And we've never guessed right the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take this to the show. Didn't sell a one of them.
Yeah.
We've never, ever pulled that trick off. It's amazing. The empty peg on the pegboard is what you sell. Whatever SKU number is on that peg that you don't have, that's the next phone call. Get that right, Bill.
Yeah, that's pretty right. Keith mentioned earlier about doing shows and so forth. Bringing a brand new kit to a show, you can be pretty much guaranteed you're not going to sell any of that kit, or maybe just 1 or 2. Main reason is guys are coming to a train show to pick up the stuff they've been looking at for the last 6 months. You bring something new as a show special and, brand new kit. My experience has been that you don't sell that kit that show. People might look at it and say, right, I'll have that in 6 months or so. But they're not there for that. They're there for the old stuff.
Yep.
So, and if you don't have it with you, that's what they want, guaranteed.
Yeah.
Well, and many shows have become more reunions than they have train shows as well.
What'd you call it, Keith? The annual redistribution of the brass?
Yeah, that was Bill's about the O-scale March meet. It was the annual.
March meet.
The O-scale meet, the guys that show up with the old Loba and all the ancient stuff, and Joe brought it from Jim the year before, and then Bob comes along and says, right, I had that 3 years ago or 10 years ago, I'll have it back. And this stuff just keeps circulating round and round, even the parts. It's like, oh, I got to have this anti-climber for this whatever, and gosh, that looks like the one I had about 10 years ago. It's good to have it back. Yeah. Crazy. They certainly weren't buying laser kits at the time. So
it's funny.
One of the screwier things I ever saw happen was after Keith and I made the trip to Sacramento and got the back shop, and I had cleaned that back room out. The last thing I had to do was sweep the floor, which was covered with brass parts. And we put them in a great big stainless steel tub that it took both of us to pack to the truck and put it in the trailer. We took that to the next show, and the old guys would stand there and fight over sorting through that bin and buy the same part that we had in a bag hanging on a pegboard.
Yeah, funny story about that. And there was a bunch of oddball parts. We'd sorted a bunch of them, and it was at the Hickory and Air Gauge convention. And Dave Grant would come by about every 2 hours and sort through the bin, and then he'd leave. And he'd come back another 2 hours, next session or whatever, and he'd sort through the bin and leave. And after a while, I realized, and Matt Coleman, one of his buddies, was over and said, yeah. He said, Dave's been over here 4 or 5 times. I've seen him. And I said, yeah. And he's put the same little pile of CP Huntington parts that somebody burned out of the old Strombecker kits and piled them in the back corner of the bin. And he comes back over 2 hours later and he piles them up and puts them back over there. And Dave had done me some real serious favors, made some things for me that they said they'd never make again. And I said, oh, really? Well, I'm going to take advantage of this. So I put him on a little baggie, and he came back a couple hours later, and he fiddled around in the bins for about a half hour or about 10 minutes or so. And he left, and there wasn't any little pile of parts in the back corner because I took them all out. And you just see he was kind of a little bit disgruntled. And about a half hour later, I trotted over to his tables and said, "Here, are you looking for these?" And just dropped them on the table and left. And it was funny because it was really one of those things where it's like, oh, wow, I got Dave Grant. And that's something not too many people got the chance to do. So,
No.
Keith, Keith's given me a lot of good advice, right? I mean, he really has, which, you can't quantify, but people do not realize how long it takes to put kits together. They see the box, they see the manual. I mean, Keith said really clearly, he said, people are paying not for your kit, they're paying for your time, and do not undervalue your time.
Yeah.
And that, that was a sort of a light switch for me when it came to, because honestly, I was going to sell my kits for less probably than I should have, because I was like, okay, margin, I'm very business minded, right? That's just unfortunately how I think, right? Margin, all that crap. And he said, don't undervalue your time. And I just don't think people realize how much time it takes to research, build a manual, build a pilot model. For us is quick. If we have the parts, they're going to go together fast because we're all fast modelers, right? I mean, it's what we do, right? But putting a manual together after the fact, taking all the pictures and organizing it all and Photoshopping all those, I mean, whatever you're doing, right? It's hard to explain to people how much time it takes to build a kit, and not to mention casting it and shipping it. And you got to, all the stuff, right? So I think that don't undervalue your time is something that I really picked up. And I don't know if people understand or have a concept of how long it takes to put kits together. It is so much more work than in sourcing and keeping track of stuff. And, I think I had a good realization of it, but it's a whole different level when you're putting 30 of something out and you got to get them out the next couple of days.
I've heard some manufacturers tell me that the worst part of being a kit manufacturer is having to write the instructions.
Oh yeah, we'd have twice as many kits because the kits are done. We just haven't written the instructions yet.
Yeah.
It takes me an average of 3 to 5 days to write a set of instructions for a new product, depending upon the size of the kit. An average kit, 3 to 5 days to write those instructions.
And see, the average modeler has no idea that amount of work is involved. To them, it's kind of, well, you put part A with part B and put glue here, and then you go on to the next step. They have no idea how long it's taking to put that information on a piece of paper and take pictures to try to show it.
Right.
And the other thing is, there is so much to building these things that it's really, you don't want to say dumbing down, but there's things that are such second nature, don't even think about it. To us, just do. And you've got to stop and train your brain to write down that you need to do this before you do this, where we've done it in the amount of time that you try to think about it, And I think that can affect, lots of times, for me anyway, especially on small kits, is it takes me longer to decide to write the instructions than when I finally start to sit down and do it.
Yeah, that's just getting to sit down and do it is, you've gone through all the trouble to design everything. You've made a couple of test cuts, you put some things together. And what I do is when I'm ready for production, I'll run production parts, and then I'll sit down and write the instructions as I build the model and take photographs at every step. And you're right, Keith, you do have to step back sometimes and say, some of these things are just natural for us as a manufacturer. The builder is not going to see that.
That's right.
So even back in the design stage, I've had some kits that have taken 3 or 4 months just working on the basic design to get it into kit form. before you even get to the instructions. And so you've got to be able to take something, put it into parts so that somebody can put those parts back together and build a model.
Well, you know, I have this trouble on my shows all the time, on the people that do what I call build-alongs on the show, where they'll take the kit. And a lot of times it's the manufacturer who made the kit is there showing how to build one of his kits.
Right.
And he'll say, well, and you know, then you cut this out and it's no big deal, you know, just take your time. And then when you stop and you think about it, and I'll ask him a question about it. Well, how exactly how did you do that? And he'll take 10 or 15 minutes to tell me how he did that.
Yeah.
But to him, it was just, everybody knows how to do that. I don't have to tell anybody how to do that. Well,
Slap some paint on it and be done.
Yeah, that's common. It's easy. Just take your time, right? And we've heard that before from a lot of people. You know, I do this, this, and this. It's easy. Just take your time.
Yeah. And you're right. A lot of people don't understand that too. I've had questions over the years where they call up and they say, well, what is this for?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, do what now? Had a guy call, some of the kits have templates for building parts. Let's say you're going to build for instance, for a trestle. You'd like to have a template so that all your bents are the same size, right? I've had people ask me, well, what is this? How does this work into the model? I said, no, that's a template to build the parts to put the model together. And usually it's, you know, after I've taken a good deep breath before I answer that question, you know, you're trying to hammer the guy in the head over the telephone, but you really can't, you know.
Yeah.
Kick the dog and throw the cat outside and then come back and tell him how to do it. Yeah.
It's just great that, you know, you ask any small block Chevy guy, he can tell you the firing order before he even thinks. And, you know, Volkswagen guy has to go look it up, you know, so yeah, it's just a matter of experience. Sure.
Yeah. I've had guys just get into model trains and say, right, I'll have one of your big mill kits, a Pro Patria mill, right? An HO. First kit he's ever built, never built a laser kit in his life. So he goes out and buys this kit, you know, $300-400 model, and sits down and starts to build. And right in the first part of the instructions on that kit, I say, if you have never built a kit like this before, close the box up, put it on your shelf, go get something different, build that first.
Yeah.
The guy ignored those, you know, he ignored that and he dove into the kit and then started complaining because he couldn't figure out what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he gets frustrated. And then he gets frustrated and decides there's no point in me being a modeler. I just can't figure it out. The kits are too complicated. They don't make them.
And it's actually one of the easier kits to build. You know, I'll help anybody. All they got to do is call me on the phone and say, hey, how do I do this? So, okay, I'll lead you through it. I'll walk you through if I have to. But the big mill is such an easy kit to build because everything's numbered and fits. And all you do.
Bill, you'd be amazed how many people tell me that they would never pick up the phone and call, not you, I'm saying a manufacturer.
Oh, yeah.
They would never go up to somebody giving a clinic at a train show and ask the question because they're afraid of embarrassing themselves. They don't want to appear dumb. And they want to be able to answer and ask intelligent questions. And they want to be recognized, but they don't want to ask the question to try to learn how to do something.
Hey, my answer to that is be dumb, pick up the phone, make a call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Easy. And nobody's going to know but the modeler and me.
Yeah. And the manufacturer would appreciate the call.
Yeah.
Sure.
Rather have you be successful with a kit than, you know, get partway through it and then push it aside and move on to something else.
That's because you'll never buy another one.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and you know, if you help someone, it's just simple good business. If you help someone, they're going to remember that, you know. And if they tell somebody else you help them, you know, you don't want it to be 1-800 ask Bill, but still, you know.
Well, again, at the end of the day, there's only two people going to know who's being stupid.
That's right.
Be the
That's right.
modeler, and maybe I'm being stupid that time, but the point is, I'm not
Right.
going to put it on a list on the internet and say, well, here's a list of guys that have no clue. We're not
Right.
going to do
Exactly. Yeah.
that. We're
Well,
going to
guys,
send you more advertising to buy more kits.
well, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it. And I want to talk to Keith just a few more minutes, but Jim and Jess and Bill, thank you so much for being with us this evening. It's been a great pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you. So Keith, the time is drawing nigh. We're almost over, but I want to give you the last word.
Oh, I guess the only thing that I can really add to the whole thing that we've done is a lot of people take their hobbies very seriously, and that's wonderful, but always make sure it stays fun and somewhat enjoyable. And I guess that's an important message for any aspect in life. We took this on I took this on and drug the wife along with me, and but kicking and screaming sometimes. But the uh, we've made it a life's work because of the fact that we did things for ourselves. We never missed soccer games. We never missed basketball games. We never missed graduations. A lot of nights we went to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. Some nights we didn't go to bed. Sometimes we didn't go places we wanted to go because we had a lot of work to do. But I think the big thing that I felt that I have done with this business and my modeling is I've been somewhat of a preservationist. People have accused me of collecting old kit companies, but I always felt that was better than them going in a landfill. And in some cases with old models as well. But I've enjoyed what I've done so far. I enjoy what I do every day, even though what I do every day is never what I plan on doing that day. It changes. Somebody will buy something you don't think you're going to sell again for 8 years, and 3 people buy them that day. But just the multifaceted aspects of what we do is what's made it fun and challenging, and never really been boring either. There's always been something to do, and the biggest thing is the quality of the people that I have met through this hobby. Very, very dear friends, several of which are no longer with us, that were very, very special to me, and running buddies and things like that. But and the 3 guys that were on here tonight, all very special to me. I mean, didn't really say so at any point doing it, but Jimmy Insco has been highly influential in this business. He knows how to fix and do anything. You look at any corner of this shop, there's something he's touched. In fact, he and I built a great deal of it ourselves. But just been fun. Hope to continue to do it for a good while. And if somebody has a serious passion for something and it happens to be model railroading, and giving back what the hobby has given to you, more than happy to help them realize that goal, so to speak, and have the good fortune and fun that I've had doing this.
Keith, it's been my honor to meet you tonight and your friends, and to spend the few hours that we've been here this evening. I can't thank you all enough, you particularly, for taking the time to join us this evening. And I'm really looking forward to phase 2 to discuss the collectives that you have, because I think that's going to be a fascinating session too. And I'm really looking forward to that as soon as we can put it together. Yeah. So thank you again for everything that you've done for the hobby. And thank you for everything that you're going to continue doing for the hobby. because you're certainly making the hobby a better organization than it's ever been before. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank our guest, and not just our guests, but our viewers on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope that you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling, and check and ring the bell so that you'll get prior notices to all of our future shows. These shows are only available to you to watch live on our YouTube channel. But I hope that you've enjoyed this one tonight, and I really appreciate you joining us. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our website, newtracksmodeling.com, because that'll give you access to our login links for our Zoom shows each Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And the only way that you can get those logins is by being a subscriber. Again, we have a Patreon account, and if you can share a few dollars, we appreciate it because it will help us offset our out-of-pocket expenses for these shows. And lastly, don't forget our scholarship. If you have a son or daughter or grandkids, tell them about it. Maybe they would be interested in applying. I hope so. It's only for model railroaders. The money was contributed by model railroaders, and it's for the use and benefit of future model railroaders. But people who are young enough, that are in high school, graduating from high school, want to continue a career in a STEAM program, this is a possibility for them to pay for some of their education. So take a look at it and pass the information along. Again, thanks so much for being here this evening. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for our next one. Thank you so much. Night.